Hey everybody, how you doing? This is Mike Brunn from the Rock and Roll Experience with Mike Brunn, and today I'm really excited to share this episode with you. I have a very special guest with me today, author Greg Prato. Some of the Kiss fans may know him from the book he put out a few years ago, The Eric Carr Story. Other rock and roll fans may know some of his other books he put out regarding Soundgarden, King's X, or even some of the other rock books that he put out. Well, he's back right now, and he's just going to be releasing a new Kiss book entitled Take It Off, Kiss Truly Unmasked. Greg was kind enough to spend a half hour with me today talking about some of the stories in the book and just kind of sharing with me and some of the fans what's inside and behind the covers of this book as well. So I think if you're a fan of Kiss in the 80s, you're going to absolutely love this book. Even just growing up in the 80s, what it was like with the Kiss expos, MTV, etc. You're really going to love this book. I highly, highly recommend it. Again, Greg was very kind to take a half hour out of his schedule today. As you will hear, he's going to be appearing on other shows, such as Eddie Trunk, in the next couple of weeks. So I feel honored that he took some time out to chat with me today. So I want to share this conversation with you, unedited, uninterrupted. So without further ado, let's get to the conversation with Greg Prato, author of the new Kiss book, Take It Off, Kiss Truly Unmasked. Thanks a lot, everybody. Hope you enjoy. Right. Hey everybody, welcome to the latest edition of the Rock and Roll Experience with Mike Brunn. I'm very excited today. I have a Kiss author with me, Greg Prato, author of the new upcoming book, Take It Off, Kiss Truly Unmasked. Hey Greg, how you doing?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me on, Mike. I appreciate it.
No, I'm excited to have you on. So I guess just really quick, just for people who are watching this, this is not your first Kiss book. In fact, it's not your first book. You've done books on, I think, Soundgarden, King's X. You did the Eric Carr book a few years back. Why now a Kiss 80s book?
It seems like the majority of the Kiss books that are out there don't really focus on the non-makeup era. I know as far as the officially released books.
Yep.
I know that Behind the Mask does have some things on the whole non-makeup era, but that's primarily from the viewpoint of Gene and Paul. So with this book called Take It Off, Kiss Truly Unmasked, I wanted to kind of open up the forum to other people such as Bruce Kulick, Ron Nevison, Toby Wright, Mitch Weissman, like all people that are somehow connected to the Kiss world, specifically throughout the 80s. And also Ace Frehley as well talks about his whole MTV Unplugged thing that happened.
Absolutely. It's one of the things. So, you and I think, are close to the same age. Did you get into Kiss, I guess, first in the 80s? What was your first Kiss album?
No, I got into Kiss in '78 when I was in kindergarten.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, my mom was kind enough to give me the first Kiss album as a kindergarten graduation gift, and
nice.
A friend at the bus stop showed me his Kiss cards because he had an older brother who liked Kiss.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I saw that, and then between first and second grade, I saw Kiss on the Dynasty tour at Nassau Coliseum with Judas Priest opening up.
Very cool. Yep. So that I.
Yeah, and then I could talk about in the book. In the early 80s, I stayed with Kiss till about 82-ish. Then I kind of took a break for about a year, and then I came back in time for Look It Up, and they became one of my favorite bands for the remainder of the 80s, and I saw them on the Crazy Nights tour and also the Hot in the Shade tour, and I saw Ace open up for Iron Maiden in 1988.
Nice. Very cool. So, one of the things I liked about the book, you were kind enough to give me a preview copy of it, is I felt it was very balanced and very fair about the 80s. You kind of talk in the book about the fact that it resurrected their career, but at the same time, sometimes people who are fans of the 80s go a little bit overboard with, some of their love for the stuff, and I get that. But I felt you were very balanced. You identified where it did resurrect their career, but at the same time, didn't go over the top with it. You want to just talk about, what you thought about the 80s and Kiss in general?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's really two sides of the coin. You could look at it. I mean, the pro is that by them taking off the makeup, they definitely resurrected their career because up till that point, even though Creatures of the Night is one of my favorite albums by Kiss, they were at a low point as far as popularity goes here in the States.
Mm-hmm.
I think Paul Stanley had a good quote that people were listening with their eyes at that point.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. So people couldn't look past the costumes and the makeup, and it was getting in the way of the quality of their music. So by taking off their makeup, they definitely rekindled their career. They had great success with radio, MTV. So they were also able to start playing arenas again because people forget Creatures of the Night. They were playing to half-empty halls, sometimes even worse. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's definitely a plus. And they also remained pretty much neck and neck with Motley Crue and Rat and Bon Jovi, those bands. that were popular. I mean, those bands were a little bit more popular, but I mean, as far as coverage in magazines, their videos being played on MTV and Headbangers Ball. So it was kind of like, pretty even at that point. The con is that you could say that Kiss was not really true to themselves throughout the 80s. They were really copying other bands.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you could go through every single album, and there are certain songs that are either throwaways or songs that sound just like, either Def Leppard or Motley Crue or whoever was popular at the time. And comparing them to the 70s albums from, say, 74 through 77, for the most part, those albums, front to back, were pretty strong, maybe like one or two throwaway songs. But certain albums in the 80s, you could say, were definitely padded with like a lot of throwaway songs. And also Paul Stanley talks about in his book how he feels like Gene wasn't really holding up his end of the bargain in the 80s. So it was really Paul running the show and Gene, kind of throwing out demos that weren't really up to par with, his, such as like I Love It Loud or Calling Dr. Love.
Yep.
So that's, I think, also a con.
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the things I remember from your book is that you had mentioned that the Animalize album, as much as you thought there were some good songs on it, you felt there was maybe a step backwards compared to where they were with Creatures and Lick It Up. Did you think that was because Gene was going Hollywood at that time? Do you think the loss of Vinnie Vincent, what do you think caused, like, I'll say, the slight maybe decline in that time?
Yeah, I think you just hit the nail right on the head. When I interviewed Ron Nevison, the producer of the Crazy Nights album,
mm-hmm.
said that Gene would be in the studio in the back room reading Variety magazine because he was more preoccupied with getting his acting career off the ground
mm-hmm.
at that point than as far as getting on board with offering quality material. I mean, that's also something else, a con that I forgot to mention before. Gene Simmons was definitely not very focused throughout the 80s. He definitely was focused come 1991, 92, again,
Absolutely.
with the Revenge album. It's, I mean, looking back, of course, we could always, now looking back, it's very easy to say, oh, he should have done this, he should have done that. But, if Gene, I guess, was more doing the demon persona throughout the 80s, that would have been, I think, more comfortable for him because you see how he was dressed for the whole, the whole Crazy Nights era, he was wearing a lot of rouge and stuff. It just wasn't very fitting for, what he was portraying in the 70s and everything. So
yeah, no, that was one of the things I was thinking about as I was reading your book, and you kind of mentioned that when they first took off the makeup, Gene was still kind of singing in that demon persona and still almost like writing in that demon persona. And I'll say Lick It Up is one of my favorite Kiss albums, period. I don't care, makeup, non-makeup. And I never thought about that, and I'm reading, I'm like, I think Greg's hitting on a point here. He seemed to kind of transition off of that as the 80s progressed, which as a Kiss fan to me was unfortunate.
Yeah, he was definitely still focused, I think, on the Lick It Up album, and that I think by far is my favorite non-makeup Kiss album because, like I said, with that album, you could totally picture them still in makeup doing those songs.
Mm-hmm.
The only criticism I have of Lick It Up is the drum sound is not as good as Creatures.
Yep.
Yeah, I think the album would have been better if it had that same Creatures sound, but they opted not to do it. I guess they were trying to go more for like Def Leppard or Motley Crue at that point, what they were doing.
Absolutely. Now, saying that, and I think, you brought up an interesting point before, you're comparing them to the Rats and the Motley Crues and the other bands that are in that era. When you look at how they were doing and the crowds they were pulling in Asylum Tour and the Crazy Nights Tour, and you compare that to where they were in 1982, 1983, well, in 82, 83, they would have died for those crowds, and that's, to me, it's amazing how they were able to resurrect their careers. And the singles they were putting out, Tears Are Falling, Crazy Nights, Heaven's on Fire, they all stood the test of time, in my opinion, and they're doing some of them on this tour right now, actually.
Right. Yeah, something that I say, too, is if you take Kiss's singles from the 80s and stack them up against Motley Crue and Rat and Bon Jovi, I think Kiss is as good or probably even stronger than a lot of those songs. I mean, I could definitely listen to, like, Lick It Up or something like that, and that, to me, sounds a lot better than, like, Poison or that, Bon Jovi that I really don't like anymore.
Yep, absolutely.
So, yeah, I just think that Kiss holds up a lot better. And something else that was pretty interesting, Kiss had a lot of singles that were hits on MTV, but did not translate as hits onto charts, which I could never understand why, because Poison and Bon Jovi and those bands did translate into top 10 singles. Whereas Kiss had videos that were being played heavily, but, Tears Are Falling, Heaven's on Fire, Lick It Up, for as much as we love those songs now, they were not top 10 hits. They peaked in the 60s and 50s, which I don't know. I don't know if it was the record company dropping the ball or what it was. That always proved to be a little bit baffling.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's an interesting thing. Now, one of the things I like about the book also is the way you kind of wrote it. it's a chapter, I'll say, for each album. There's other things besides just the albums, and I'll talk a little bit, ask you a few questions about that. But it gives the reader your point of view at first, but then it brings in all these different special guests. You've mentioned a few of them before, but you're only really scraping the tip of the iceberg of the amount of guests that you had in this book. I think there's Rudy Sarzo was in there, Charlie Benante, Ron Keel, KK Downing, so you kind of really, in my opinion, get a feel for what it was like in the 80s, not just from the author's point of view yourself, but even from some of the peers that were there. Want to talk a little bit about some of those special guests that you were able to kind of bring in for the book?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I spoke to everyone you just mentioned, but one person I did not speak to Rudy Sarzo for this book.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. I thought he was in there.
It's fine now, but I interviewed, I tried to interview people that maybe one would expect, like, for instance, Ron Nevison, the producer from Crazy Nights. Also, I tried not to interview the same people, by and large, that I interviewed for the previous Eric Carr storybook, but there were a few that I felt would probably have very interesting points to make. So I interviewed Charlie Benante again from Anthrax.
Yeah.
To talk about his memories of opening up for Kiss on the Crazy Nights tour, and also his memories of being on the Kiss My Ass tribute album. I also interviewed Ron again because, he's the producer, so it's always interesting to hear him talk about the Crazy Nights album, because that's definitely a love-hate album with a lot of Kiss fans.
Absolutely.
Loved it. A lot of people hate it. I mean, one thing that I do agree with Ron is Kiss totally fumbled the ball a few years back. When Crazy Nights turned, it would have been turning, 20 years or 30? I forget, 20 or 30 years. It was it just passed the anniversary. They should have definitely reissued that, because Ron Nevison said he always envisioned that album to be a little bit harder rocking, and that kind of went with what was popular at the time.
Yep.
So a lot of those songs would have been stronger if it had more of like a hard rock, if it had like a type production. Yeah. So I don't know why Gene and Paul didn't think of doing that. I guess maybe more preoccupied with getting the final tour off the ground or something. Yeah,
no, I think it would have made a nice 30th anniversary. They could have put some of those demos from that time period that, to me, something like a Sword and Stone. I can't believe that was never released by Kiss, so there was an opportunity, lost opportunity, but I think you're hitting the nail on the head. I think they're a little preoccupied. I saw some of the comments online. One of the guests also that you had commented in the book, which I think is great, was Eddie Trunk. And, Eddie Trunk right now, there's a love-hate relationship between Kiss fans and him. But, to me, he's an integral part of the story in the 80s, working with Ace. I thought he had an interesting story in the book about when the Lick It Up album came out. And I won't give the details away, but I thought that was a fun story. What was it like, involving him in the book?
Oh, it was great. Eddie's always been an incredible help with all my previous books. I've interviewed him many times over the years. He's always great. In fact, I'm going to be on his Sirius radio show once this book comes out. Yeah, so that's very nice of him to have me on. But, he's always been incredibly helpful with my books. Very nice guy. And, I don't know, for some reason, I know behind closed doors, Kiss fans can debate with their friends what they love and hate about Kiss. But as soon as Eddie Trunk, who is clearly a very big Kiss fan, where he doesn't like, I don't know, suddenly Kiss fans have a big problem with him. I don't understand why, but I guess it's acceptable if we do it, in our own homes between friends. But as soon as you get on a radio show, people have a problem with that. But, honestly, I can see, I personally prefer the original Kiss lineup, but I can understand why Gene and Paul do what they do. I mean, if the band is still valid, they're still attracting very large crowds, why not?
Absolutely. Yeah, one of the other guests that I liked in the book, because quite honestly, I've never even read or seen any comments from them. You have a section on the MTV Unmasking, and you actually have some comments in there from the original MTV VJs, which, J.J. Johnson, obviously, unfortunately, is no longer with us. But, I think it was a couple of the other VJs that you have comments on. And I found that a very interesting point of view, because all these years, I've never seen a single one of them that I can recall comment on that experience. So,
right. Yeah, you know what that is? With this book, like you said, I've done a fair amount of books previously. That chapter, that little part about Kiss Unmasking, that's an excerpt from an earlier book of mine called MTV Ruled the World.
Okay.
Yeah, because when that book came out about maybe 6 or 7 years ago, that was actually one of the chapters. So I figured that would fit perfectly in this book. So
Absolutely.
I just put that there. And like you said, we have Joe Elliott from Def Leppard talking about it. We have one of the Ann Wilson from Heart, I remember. And the bassist from the band Devo says something very funny at the end of the chapter, which I don't want to give away, but it's pretty funny what he has to say.
Absolutely. That's, to me, one of the cool things. I've been a Kiss fan for, it's almost 40 years now. And so I've read tons of interviews. I've watched all the videos. I've collected all the bootlegs over the years. And even reading this book, I learned a few things, and I don't want to give away the details in this because I want the readers to read it. But there was a band in the mid '90s, ended up a very popular hit that I never realized that Gene came close to managing, and you mentioned that. There's a bit about Vinnie Vincent right after the Lick It Up tour and some things that were going on, which I never realized.
Right.
So, did you learn any new things as you were going through this book and doing some research?
Yeah, I learned some interesting things. I started to say before, but I think I got sidetracked. What I tried to do with this book was interview the people that you would expect, and also reach out to some people that maybe haven't been interviewed at length yet about this. For instance, one of my favorite bands of all time is the band called Faith No More. Mm-hmm. I know that Bill Gould, the bassist for Faith No More, was part of Shandy's Addiction, which is the band covered Calling Dr. Love for the Kiss My Ass tribute. So I reached out to him, and he was all for it, and he had some very interesting things to say. Mm-hmm. And I'll give away this tidbit that I think that song was recorded in 1993, and he said for Christmas that year, he opened up his door once, and what was sitting there but a fruit basket from Kiss.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So that was very nice of Gene and Paul to do that, I think. So.
Absolutely. No, that was a great story. So, one of the things I like about the book also is the beginning of every chapter starts with, it gives a listing of the songs, like you said, the chart position of the singles of the album, the release date of the albums. I don't know if you've seen some of the debates recently online about when some of these albums were released or not. Have you seen those at all? Any comments on those release dates?
Yeah, no, I mean, it seems like the people that make comments are usually right. That's because usually the people that comment are the guys that are putting out Kiss books themselves.
Absolutely. Yep.
So, yes, they seem to. Because the thing is too is back then in the 70s and 80s, it's not like it is now where information is very easily to be documented. Back then I think release dates were maybe just jotted down on a piece of paper.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
Knows what was going on then. Yeah, but no, that's definitely one of the good things, I guess, about the internet and Facebook is you can communicate with all other fans and stuff, and you can try to get to the bottom of certain things.
Absolutely. And, in my case, I think back to when Crazy Nights came out. I know for a fact I had it 2-3 days before the quote unquote official release date because the record store I used to go to had it. They put it on the shelf and that was it. I bought it. I remember playing it in my house and inviting one of my friends over, but I didn't tell him I had the album. So the first song is Crazy Nights. We had the 45 and the next song comes on. He's like, what's this? So I think even those release dates I think are a little bit blurry, but whatever. Another chapter in the book that I love, and unless you were a product of the 80s, I don't think you could truly appreciate it. And that is the Kiss Expos and the start of the Kiss Expos in New Jersey, up in the Massachusetts area. There was one as well. Do you want to just talk a little bit about that? Did you go to those expos back then?
Yeah, I was lucky to go to one. I went to the one that was, I believe, in early '89. I went to the one that was in Jersey. I didn't even drive at that point. My parents were kind enough to drive me from all the way from Long Island all the way there. Mm-hmm. But yeah, to the best of my knowledge, that was Richie Rano, who was formerly of the band Stars, who I'm a very big fan of. That's a band I remember hearing of at the time, but didn't check out till maybe about 5 years ago, and I was really blown away by them when I checked out a best of theirs, and I like a lot of their songs. And anyway, Richie, who's the guitarist from Stars, he had some ties to Kiss because Stars was managed by Bill Aucoin. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I interviewed him for the book, and he talks about how he got involved in the whole Kiss convention things and how it started in Jersey. Really, well, it started someplace else, but the one that happened every year and the biggest one was in Jersey. That continues to this day. Absolutely. Yeah, and he had some pretty interesting things to say. I think that fans will be interested to hear about the whole story about how Kiss Expos started.
Absolutely, yeah. And to me, that's what made being a Kiss fan in the 80s so much fun. You had the albums coming out practically every September, but you had the expos, you had Ace Frehley doing solo stuff, Vinnie Vincent doing solo stuff. Hell, you even had Mark St. John put out an album with White Tiger.
Yep, I remember that.
Gene's doing all of his movies. To me, it was an exciting time to be a Kiss fan. And, I go on the cruises every year, and even to this day, one of the most requested songs that you hear the cruises yelling out for Kiss to do is All Hell's Breaking Loose.
Oh, yeah.
So it kind of shows that this stuff has resonated all these years later.
Yeah, and something else about that song, which I think I talk about in the book, is that was one of, to the best of my knowledge, first rap rock type songs. And for some reason, and Kiss never gets really credit for that. So that's something that Kiss doesn't get credit for, is that was at least a good 2 or 3 years before Aerosmith and Run DMC did Walk This Way.
Absolutely.
It was a year or two before Faith No More did the song called We Care a Lot, which was also a rap rock song. So yeah, so Kiss was definitely definitely one of the first, but they don't get credit for that.
Oh, without a doubt. Another chapter in the book that doesn't necessarily focus on the albums, but you kind of highlight all of the key major interviews that were done during the 80s. Obviously, there's no way to cover every one of them, but you certainly highlight the key ones. To me, the 70s, the Tom Schneider interview is the pinnacle of Kiss. Right. Was there anything as you're doing this research from the 80s that you're like, hey, that to me is like the pinnacle, like one of the greatest interviews from the 80s? Any tidbits you can remember from doing that research?
I'm trying to think what you mean as far as what my favorite one was.
Yeah.
Well, the one that stands out the most was for a whole week, and I think it was 80, maybe early 86. Eric Carr was the host of a show called Radio 1990. He was a co-host with was a female VJ named Catherine Kinley.
Yep.
And I remember it was pretty interesting to see him that whole week because he was never really interviewed that much on camera. Absolutely. So it was interesting to see what he had to say. And I think why fans liked him so much is out of all the Kiss members, Eric and Bruce, I think, were probably the most down to earth at that point. Like they weren't really putting on an act or a show, whereas Paul Stanley at that point was kind of like being very over the top with what he would say and everything. But it was interesting to hear what Eric Carr had to say. I mean, I talk about it in the book. He talks about what some of his favorite rock bands were at the time, so it's interesting to hear that, what he was into at that point. He also talked about trying out for Kiss, so that was pretty cool to hear what he had to say. And again, it was interesting to see him be just so he was definitely one of the people, I think. That's kind of gave off the feel he gave off.
Yep, absolutely. I think one of the interesting things to me as I'm going through the book was, to me, you mentioned it before, Creatures of the Night is to me a great album. I will always associate that as a makeup album, but you do highlight a chapter where it was, put out again around, I forget, it was 1985-ish, I think. And somebody that you were talking with actually refers to it as a non-makeup album, which kind of was like, wow, that's really wild to me that somebody actually sees that as a non-makeup album.
Yeah, I think it was actually Wednesday 13, who's a theatrical medalist type guy. He's a big Kiss fan. I interviewed him for the book, and he talked about that. And I mean, for that, I guess it made sense for them to reissue it at that point because that's when Kiss's popularity was definitely on the upswing again.
Absolutely.
Excuse me.
Absolutely.
So I mean, it made sense. But again, what they did is they got it totally wrong. They put a picture of Bruce Kulick on the cover, and Bruce had nothing to do with that album. Yep. So but I guess it was all about trying to push up the sales. But obviously it worked because in 1994 the album was finally certified gold. So that obviously helped sales.
Absolutely. So to me, there was a question you asked, I think it was to Brent Fence in the book, that I wanted to ask you because I think it was a great question. To me today, there appears to be a new appreciation for the 80s, right? That's the question you asked him.
Yes.
Why do you think there's a greater appreciation now for the 80s era of Kiss than there was maybe in the past?
Well, to a certain degree, it's still the forgotten era because Kiss doesn't really do a lot of that material live anymore. That's why I think fans that go on the Kiss cruises love when Bruce does these sets.
Yep.
And in fact, I would like to think that once Kiss is done with the tour, the final tour they're doing, either Bruce may take that on the road or maybe Gene and Paul may just do solo shows and maybe they'll start revisiting some of those songs because it's like a whole entire series of albums that doesn't really get the credit anymore and
Absolutely.
that songs aren't performed. And fans obviously know the songs. And like I talk about in the book, it's still a very popular era that in the top 5 or 10 songs, current Kiss songs on Spotify, 4 of those songs are not from the 70s.
Right.
It's from the 80s. So there's definitely a crowd out there, I think, that would really get a kick out of seeing those songs perform live again. And that was why I also did this book. I felt that there was a whole group of people that would really get a kick out of reading this whole era, which was never really documented solely in book form before.
Oh, 100%. And, Bruce has said many times that he's kind of carrying the torch for the 80s.
Right.
And, I see that on the cruise. You mentioned before the sets that he does on the cruise, which to me are always amazing, loaded with deep cuts from the 80s. I believe you spoke with Bruce, for this book as well. Did you get any feedback from him regarding the book and just, any other insights on the 80s from him that you maybe haven't heard before?
Yeah, I mean, along with Eddie Trunk, I got to say Bruce Kulick couldn't be a nicer guy. He's always been super helpful. He really is one of the best people out there that I've dealt with. Yes, he really is a great guy. In fact, it was he who hooked me up with Chris Jericho, who wrote the books Forward.
Yep.
Yeah, I reached out to Bruce because Bruce again was kind enough. He gave me like a 2-hour interview for this book.
Oh, nice.
That we covered. Yeah, he's featured throughout the book because again with this book, Bruce I'm sure has been interviewed, but not as extensively and. He was there from 1984 through 1995, 96, so he's obviously he was right there on the front line, so he has great stories, and he definitely didn't disappoint. So yeah, I spoke with him, and I sent him a copy of the book, and he said he really likes it a lot. So that was great to hear that he's a fan of the book and to get his thumbs up.
Absolutely. So, obviously Bruce was in the band, like you said, during that entire time, like that 10-year period. But there's that period right around 1990 where rumors started that perhaps Ace was going to come back. Perhaps there was going to be a makeup thing with Ace and with Eric Carr. And you kind of touch on that a little bit.
Right.
What are your thoughts? Do you think that was actually a real thing that was going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it was probably talked about. I mean, Gene and Paul and Ace were all friendly at that point still. So, and probably also Eric too, because I know Eric and Ace and Eric were also friends. I know. So it was probably discussed. I mean, we all know at that point Ace wasn't sober, so that may have been thrown a wrench in the plan. And also, it was supposed to be around 89, 90. That's when the song "Forever" became a hit. Yep. So maybe they figured, we don't need to do the reunion now because now this song is a hit. So now we can just do our own tour right now, just as it is. Yep. Yep. So I don't, who knows what the story is. But speaking of Bruce Kulick, he does have a pretty interesting quote about that in the book, whether it was actually true or not. So yeah, I'll let people read that.
Absolutely.
What I'm saying, but I personally think I'm sure it was probably talked about at some point. But how close it came to actually happening, who knows? But some of the people I speak to, which I agree with, if that did happen, it would not have done nearly as good as the 96 reunion, I don't think.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. So, another part of the book that I actually really loved was you interviewed the producer for some of the Revenge videos.
Yes.
So, kind of hearing some of the behind the stage stories of I Just Wanna, and I think it was Domino, if I remember right off the top of my head. Yeah. So, to me, anything you want to share regarding, those conversations without giving away too much from the book, obviously?
That's the director. His name is Paul Rackman, who also, he directed a lot of other videos like the Pantera videos from, not Cowboys from Hell. I forget if it was Cowboys from Hell or I think it was the Vulgar Display of Power video, one or two of those videos. Yep. And he also did Man in the Box by Alice in Chains, and a bunch of classic videos. And I remember the reason why Kiss got him is because they were a big fan of those videos, and they were trying to go for a more gritty kind of feel at that point with their look and everything and their sound. So they got him to direct first. It was the Unholy video. Yep. And he said Paul was directing them, and at one point they were doing a lot of like not old, but like 80s Kiss moves with Paul dancing and prancing, and he pulled them aside and said, "Look, guys, you hired me for a reason, and you want me to bring you to this world, this grittier world. You got to listen to what I'm saying." And I think first were like, "No, blah blah blah," and he's like, "No, look, if you want this to turn out the way you want it, you have to listen to me." And then they said, "All right, 1 second," and they all went off to the side. They had a little huddle. They talked about it, and they came back and it was, "All right, you're right. We'll do what you say." So it was interesting, and it obviously paid off for them with that album. That was definitely that was their first top 10 album, I think, since Dynasty. Yep. Here in the States, and that was definitely a very critically acclaimed album, and a lot of fans point to that as the return to Kiss, and that was definitely the return of Gene, as far as I'm concerned.
Without a doubt, 100% agree. Shortly after that, then obviously they went on. They did the MTV Unplugged. They were on that whole acoustic convention tour in the mid '95 time period. Yeah. I think you mentioned what a great album the Unplugged is. To me, it's one of the greatest live albums Kiss has done. I put it. Yeah. I'll say right after Kiss Alive. I think it's that good personally.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. I mean, what I like about it too is I don't think that a lot of like what it is. The bad thing about Alive 2 and Alive 3, you could tell there were a lot of overdubs afterwards.
Yep.
That album to me sounds like there were not those many overdubs. And I agree. I think that Kiss Unplugged is definitely up there with Nirvana and all the other classic ones. And for some reason, people never really point to that when they talk about the classic Unplugs, but. No, I think that one's great, and that also I talked about this in the book. Is that also proved once and for all that something that I think a lot of other Kiss fans feel is that Kiss are vastly underrated songwriters.
Absolutely,
seems like Gene and Paul never get the credit that they deserve. I mean, if you just think about all the great songs and also just the great vocal harmonies that they were able to do. I think that that's one thing. Of course, that's what attracted me to Kiss at first was the makeup and the costumes as a kid, but the thing that makes me still listen to Rock and Roll Over and Creatures of the Night and all these albums is the quality of the songs. So.
Absolutely. No, I've said that for 40 years. The makeup might be a nice little niche for 5 minutes, but if the songs aren't there, you're not going to stay for 40 years.
Right.
Absolutely. So, to me, one of the great things about the book also is it brought me back into the 80s, whether it was the expos that we spoke about before, the different albums, the interviews, and all the different things going on, hearing the comments from the other people, that you interviewed. If you could go back in time into the 80s, relive one of the tours or whatever, what would it be?
Well, does it have to be, could I go with creatures or does it have to be non-makeup?
Whichever you prefer.
Well, I mean, creatures I would probably like to see just because from the footage I see, it looks like it was definitely one of the best tours, and it was a tour that wasn't really out there for very long. So, and also if I could go back in time, I'd buy 200 copies of the Creatures tour book because that would make a pretty penny right now.
Absolutely. You ain't kidding.
Also, I think seeing the Lick It Up tour would have been also pretty interesting to check out as well because I am a fan of the whole Vinny era because I think Vinny did bring a lot to the band. I mean, I won't get into the whole dark side of Vinny, but but he was definitely a very talented guy, and he was a big part of what made Kiss, the whole entire Kiss finding their way again.
Absolutely.
I'd probably go with the Creatures and also Lick It Up tours. Those are the two tours I'd go with.
I was very fortunate. I actually sort of Lick It Up tour at Radio City, and absolutely, if I could go back to that night, I would go back like that in a heartbeat. I thought it was a great show. Right. Any other Kiss books that you have planned? Obviously, you've done the Eric Carr book. You've done now this one. Do you think this closes the chapter for you at Kiss, or do you have any other great thoughts in mind?
Yeah, I mean, what it is I've actually interviewed Bruce for some of my other books. Like I did a book called Shredders about 2 or 3 years ago, which I talk about all the 80s shredders. And I actually interviewed Bruce and also Ace for that book.
Nice.
So that's a book I think Kiss fans would enjoy. I also interviewed Bruce for the book I did about, a book called Survival of the Fittest, Heavy Metal in the 1990s. I interviewed him for that book.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And that's probably going to be it for Kiss for the time being. I mean, I know that Bruce told me that he wants to do a book at one point just about his whole career, and I told him, I said I'd be honored to help you. So that's something I would definitely be interested in doing, is helping him out with his book, because he's always full of very interesting stories and stuff.
Without a doubt.
Yes, be cool to interview him for that. And then just as far as me personally, I just put out a self-published book last month called Dark, Black, and Blue, the Soundgarden story, because Soundgarden is my all-time favorite bands. Absolutely. Still affected and saddened by Chris by Chris Cornell's death. That's such a waste and such a tragedy. I wish it didn't happen.
Absolutely.
But and also half of Soundgarden were huge Kiss fans. They Matt the drummer and also Kim the guitarist Matt was in a Kiss tribute band in the 70s, and Kim I know saw Kiss several times back in the 70s, and he points to the live album as to what got him into rock and roll.
Okay.
Yeah, so so if anyone wants to check that out, that just came out recently it's called Dark, Black, and Blue, the Soundgarden story, and that's available on Amazon. Yeah,
I was going to say, where can people get that? So it's on Amazon, and is that where the new Kiss book, will they be able to get it on Amazon as well?
Yeah. Yes, the book Take It Off, which is about Kiss, it's called Take It Off, Kiss Truly Unmasked. That is available for pre-order currently on Amazon, and it is officially released November 19th.
Yeah, and I can tell you, everybody watching this, again, Greg was kind enough to give me a copy in advance. I read it within 3 days. I couldn't put it down. I thought it was absolutely amazing. It relived my teenage years. I could not more strongly recommend everybody picking this up. I don't think anybody could ever be disappointed if you're into Kiss.
Great. Thank you, Mike. I appreciate that.
No, thank you. Is there anything else you want to tell anybody before we wrap this up, Greg?
Just like I said, I have a bunch of other books out there. You could always go to Amazon.com and look up my name, which is Greg Prato, Prato. And I'm always writing for websites and magazines, and also always putting out books. So you can go to my Twitter page, which is twitter.com/Greg Prato Writer. And I'm always posting whatever my latest interview was or whatever is going on. In fact, recently what I've been posting, a lot of the people I've interviewed for the book have been and that got copies already, have been kind enough to be plugging it because they like it so much. So I know that Ron Keel was kind enough to post something the other day. Nice. Derek Sherinian, who was the keyboardist on the Kiss Revenge tour, he was kind enough to post something. So so that's what's out there. If you want to go to twitter.com/Greg Prato Writer.
Excellent. No, Greg, like I said, thank you again. This has been great. And for all the Kiss fans out there, and even the non-Kiss fans, go out, buy the book. You'll definitely enjoy it. You'll definitely relive in those 80 years. And Greg, again, thank you very much for taking the time today to chat about it.
Great. Thank you, Mike. I appreciate it.
Take it easy. Bye-bye. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Hey, bye-bye.
All right. There you have it, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Rock and Roll Experience with Mike Brunn. Thanks again to Craig Prato for being a wonderful guest and sharing stories about his upcoming book, Take It Off, Kiss Truly Unmasked. Follow my Facebook page, The Rock and Roll Experience with Mike Brunn, where each and every day we talk about all the rock and roll music that you love. And follow me on Twitter at Mike_Brunn. Thanks, everybody.